All right, here we are. Welcome everybody to this session. I have the honor of moderating this panel of quite a diverse and esteemed group of professionals here. And I'd like you to join us in this discussion we're going to have today regarding the role FinTech plays in our journey to net zero. Now, I want to kick this off by saying that I've been in Singapore for over 6 years now, and I've seen this festival over the years. But this is the first time I've seen the impact and importance sustainability has in FinTech. And by far, as you can tell from just having the stage and even a separate sustainability section, the importance this has grown in all aspects of the work we do. So I just wanted to, first of all, thank the organizers of this event to put this important problem up and have people such as the folks on stage talk about it so that you can hear from their mouths what is happening at the cutting edge, how we're thinking about the issues that we face, and how we can actually get involved and help with the solutioning of it. So having said that, in the very beginning, I'm just going to have a brief intro of everybody to you so that you can get to know them. So right to my right, we have Maya from if you would like to introduce yourself and your company that you just started.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to be here. My name is Maya Hari. I'm the CEO for Terrascope. We're a Singapore-headquartered global end-to-end decarbonization SaaS platform. Lovely to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Great. And to her right is Manjula. She's from a very interesting sounding company called the Worldwide Generation.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. I'm actually coming from London, and it's great to be in Singapore for this incredible event. I'm the CEO and founder of Worldwide Generation and the G17 Eco platform. We've been developing this platform for about 6 years. We've rationalized all the ESG standards, frameworks, policies, ratings into one digital taxonomy, and now we're the tech partner for SGX. We're onboarding all the listed companies onto the platform at scale, and working with a bunch of the Singapore Inc. ecosystem to now support private and SME companies on this journey to net zero, but actually beyond that, actually full sustainability, social, economic, and environmental. Thank you.
Right, and we have Jonathan from Ping An.
Hi there, Jonathan Larsen. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Ping An, and I also run our corporate venture capital fund called the Ping An Global Voyager Fund, which invests in digital health and FinTech on a global basis. I guess we'll get into the conversation, but I think Ping An is an example of a large, fairly diversified corporate that's trying to take its ESG and particularly climate change responsibilities very seriously indeed. I think we've been amongst the first companies sort of out of the box, as it were, to try and systematically put in place ESG measurements. And we've tried to do that in a way that we can then adapt as a service for our corporate clients. And I'll talk a little bit later about what we're trying to do to help individuals manage their own carbon footprints.
Great, and last but not least, we have Helge from DBS.
Yeah, cool, thanks. Hi everyone, so I'm Helge. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at DBS. DBS is a bank. And we see ourselves as one building block in a wider ecosystem that needs to address sustainability challenges. One of our role is to reallocate capital because we have quite a lot of sustainability challenges that we face, and it will require a lot of capital to transition to a new way of life, effectively, for our societies. And that's really one of our core roles. And we're going to speak about this probably a bit later, but tech is a key enabler in what we want to do. So very happy to be here.
Great. So as you can see, we have quite an interesting group of people here. We have Manjula and Maya representing newer companies, the innovations coming out from the ground. And then we have the other gentleman representing larger entities with a lot of influence, a lot of surface area and space. And I think in this discussion, we're going to try and mix the two together and see how we can work together and meet somewhere in the middle and see what we can do in our journey towards sustainability. So let me kick the discussion topic off with the digitization of assets, which is part of what the whole fintech revolution is as we digitize the world around us and convert it into numbers, it enables us to then process and compute these numbers for different types of output. And this has happened in many different industries, including fintech. But in the context of sustainability, what we have seen is that we've had an imperfect economic model. When I was studying economics, there was this thing called externalities, where we just parked all the things we couldn't value well and just said, well, it's positive or externalities. That worked until now, where we've parked basically our environment to a point where it's actually forcing us to retroactively account for it. One example would be carbon. Sweden used to not care about carbon, go and burn the forest, become a billionaire. Can't do that anymore because society, humanity itself is suffering. And so you can't do that anymore, and now we're building mechanisms. So as we digitize these assets, and I know each one of you has a perspective and work going on in this way, perhaps I could start with Maya, given what your company does, if you can explain a little bit how you're digitizing assets, providing the visibility and incorporating that into planning.
Yeah, I think the digitization becomes a very important starting point for the journey around decarbonization. You've got to think about this as a multi-decade journey, but you've got to start at knowing where you are today and where do you want to go to zero from. So where do you go to net zero from means you have to start really thinking about where you are today and measuring really the carbon footprint of the organization, of the supply chain, of the operations. And the way we see this is that we really bring in a lot of first-party data from customers, whether that is business activity data, financial data, or others, things that are in your control as an enterprise, and start to really map out what an estimation of emissions for the company looks like. But more importantly, I think the exercise is a great starting point to say, what is material in terms of contribution to emissions and what's not? And frankly, you want to start to think about how do you capture as much of the data assets to directionally point to something you're quite comfortable with as a baseline in emissions. I always say that looking at carbon emissions and carbon accounting is a directional science. It's not a perfect science. It will be a perfect science when we digitize the entire assets, not just for the companies, but also through the supply chain all the way end to end. And while you never wait for perfection to get started, the starting point is really taking and looking at internal data that you have and starting to say, how do you prioritize where do you start decarbonizing in your supply chain, in your operations? And that's the first piece of really digitizing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really important aspect, but one of the challenges I see happening is how do you get the data and trust the data? And I would ask Jonathan, Ping An is a large conglomerate in financial services with many different capabilities. And as a chief innovation officer over there, how do you see different elements of the company? What kind of data and how are you trying to measure what kind of work is going in a large organization like this?
I think the first point to make is that this is a journey, and you're not going to get to your end state instantaneously, and you're going to make progress and learn a lot of lessons along the way. I think for those in the audience that know Ping An, you'll know that we are a company that has invested enormously in, firstly, data resources, and secondly, data analytics resources, especially in machine learning and artificial intelligence. I think we have over 2,000 data scientists that have either master's degree or PhD in AI, on top of about 30,000 R&D engineers across the place. So this is really front and center for us. And so in trying to get our hands around our ESG footprint, and specifically within that carbon emissions, as amongst the first companies in China to be seriously addressing this problem, starting 5-6 years ago, it wasn't like there was a ready-made set of metrics that we could tap into in the marketplace, and even the classification systems, to Maya's point, they were and are still evolving. So we had to sort of find our way. And I think what we've done is, the first challenge we've said is, how do we measure our own footprint? Scope 1, Scope 2, and I guess to the extent we can, Scope 3. And then secondly, from that, can we actually build an evolution path to become more and more reliable? And from there, are we able to create a platform from that we can then apply, particularly using data and analytics as much as possible to our customers and other entities in the marketplace. So we've actually created a China-based rating agency to try and create ratings for companies. We do the same thing, by the way, because we're one of the largest bond investors in China, both private and public market. We've done the same thing in credit, especially private credit. So it's kind of analogous, actually,
Yes.
and we've built this capability. And then a third area that's really interesting from a data perspective is individuals. So we have 225 million financial services clients and 650 million internet users in our broader ecosystem. So we've got this vast base. Within our financial services, we have about 110 million China UnionPay debit and credit card customers. So we're the number 2 credit card issuer in China today. So we've created, in May this year, we launched this idea called the personal carbon account. And as I'm sure DBS has a similar kind of view and story. It'll be interesting to hear from Helge in a moment. But one thing we've done is said, well, if we can see how much petrol or what utility bills people are paying using their payment instruments, that gives us a really good anchor to starting to understand the personal carbon footprint. And with the customer's consent, if they're interested in opting in, you can then layer in a whole bunch of data from other sources that start to round out that picture. And suddenly you can answer the question, or begin to answer the question as an individual, what is my carbon footprint and what am I doing about reducing that proactively? And can we as a service provider actually start suggesting ways of doing that more efficiently? So there's some of the things that we're working on. I would just caveat everything I say, but we would be the first to acknowledge that we're very much at the early stage of this journey in really being able to reconcile our activities with the country level objectives, which in China's case is carbon neutrality by 2060. We do have a corporate objective to achieve neutrality on our own by 2030.
Yeah, it's a huge surface area given the amount of users in all the different systems you have. And when we talk about the data and concepts of an exchange, and this is a question I have for Helge, with DBS and its capability to create exchanges and to actually transact on the data, it'd be very interesting to hear what plans DBS. I know DBS and Temasek has some work going on as well, but what's happening these days on that front?
Absolutely. If I may, 60 seconds step back. We went straight into very technical topics, and I'm a big fan of defining the purpose. Why are we talking so much about sustainability? And I don't know the folks in this room.
Neither do I.
as a consequence, maybe just a few seconds on why this is so important. And actually, the last 10 days were very astonishing, and I'll tell you why. There was 8 major publications, 8, over the last 10 days being published. There was the United Nations Environmental Programme issuing a emissions gap report. Climate Action Tracker talked about the state of climate action we are taking. One report that really sparked my interest was a report by Lancet, which talked about the impacts on physical and mental health that is created by all these sustainability challenges. And bear in mind, climate is only one of many, many sustainability challenges. There are 17 UN SDGs, United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, and there are 17 for a reason. It's not just climate.
That's
but
right.
if I glimpse at these 8 reports, I have a couple of key observations. Number one, the impact on people is very real. This is why we're talking about this stuff. People are being impacted, and most importantly, poorer communities. Observation number 2, we're not even remotely fast enough in addressing this. We're moving a little bit here and there, not fast enough at all. And number 3, which brings me to the crowd in this room or at the event overall, tech is going to be instrumental. Without tech, we will not be able to actually facilitate all the things we need to do. And we are a bank. I said we are one part of a wider ecosystem. We need governments, regulators. We need the private sector, the finance sector, all of us embedded in the community at large to move. Banks are important, but not sufficient, of course. One important task we have is allocation of capital, financing the transition of our societies to address climate change and all the other sustainability challenges. Not sure I have to throw other numbers at it, but the financing needs are staggering. So if I zoom into what we need as a bank on tech, there's an inward-looking part and there's an outward-looking part. Inward-looking, we need better data because we need to take informed decisions. How do we allocate capital? We don't quite know. And we need Maya and Manjula to actually help us in managing our data better. And actually next week we're going to launch a major global hackathon. I can't share the details. We're going to do it next week at COP, but where we're going to throw some problem statements at people, and we want you to help us, because sometimes others are better at doing things than us, so we need to build this ecosystem. So we need better data for management and so on and so forth. The outward-looking part is, how do we use this in our client engagement? We are a bank. We don't produce stuff. We don't produce suits, iPads, cars, but we are enabling that with our financing. And by so enabling it, you can attribute, for example, greenhouse gas emissions to what we do. So how do we use data and new analytical tools in our client engagement? That is also very critical. So I addressed your question slightly differently, but I wanted to really first establish a bit the purpose.
No, thanks. I mean, that is why you're the Chief Sustainability Officer. Thank you for pulling us back and setting the context. But I think what you described, particularly about the ecosystem and our role that we have based on the company that we work for, how we fit into the solution. And I think I would love to hear Manjula's story, because where you're working is all about the interconnectivity, alignment of incentives, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Helge, thanks for saying what you said. I love that, because really the topic shouldn't really be about, well, climate change and defining the problem, but really it's about causation problem solving. And we owe it to ourselves as technologists, FinTech or sector solutionists to say, what problem are we trying to solve? Climate change is a symptom, it's not a cause. If we go and measure scope 1, 2, and 3 today, which is great, we can address where we are as a baseline. But what is the cause of climate change? Every IPCC report says climate change is 100% man-made. Why? We have a responsibility as providers to actually raise the human consciousness with new data that says, and new belief systems that say, hey, it's actually more prosperous to be sustainable than it is to not be. We have to build this new data set that shows this prosperity. It is a people issue. People, profit, planet. If we solve the people issue, which is about getting new data in front of them to show them that there is a better way, actually de-risking your company means increasing value for it. Then if we take that to the economic system, at the moment we have an economic system that doesn't penalize the bad behavior, nor does it reward the good behavior. And actually, the human condition is about reward. At the moment, if we have a system that does not reward that good behavior, it's going to lose everyone. We need a system that's urgent of rewarding good behavior. And if we can move in that direction, if we heal ourselves, we heal the planet. And our role right now as technologists, as banks, as financiers, is to actually get this ecosystem going. We all have to work together. We all have to be on one interoperable system. We all need to be looking at the same golden source of trusted, comparable, verified data, and then we can build a marketplace. I want to sort of share something today that's so exciting. Over the last 6 months, this ecosystem, particularly Singapore Inc., has come together. Companies, big and small, assurers, rating agencies, the stock exchange, the regulators, the banks, the government. Singapore is poised as a ecosystem to lead the world to how we're going to do a sustainable future. If we're all working together, trusted, comparable, verifiable data source, impact data, not just ESG inputs and outputs, but outcomes and impact data, we can then do the matchmaking of investment to deal flow. There has never been up until today where we can have this trusted, comparable, verifiable data source that Helge can look at and say, I can compare apples with apples now and see who's giving me more bang for my buck. This is the importance of this evolution. The next piece is the matchmaking. What I wanted to share today is we are now seeing individuals and families coming to Worldwide Generation and saying, hey, we have these assets, we want to protect these assets. We don't want to sell it to various mining or extraction or whatever it is. And they're saying, we want to put these assets into some kind of sovereign wealth fund and protect these assets. And then we want to power up every single SDG based on the assets that we have. They're not waiting for governments. They're not waiting for corporates. Families and individuals are saying, hey, we have this asset. How can we bring it, protect it, and now power up the ecosystem? So we really are about the monitoring piece, then the marketplace, then the movement. And so that's really what we're bringing together with G17 Eco.
I mean, I totally agree with you that it's a people problem. I've always wondered why, and correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, but if you do well, or you do good, right? Like say you're running a nonprofit, you're helping people, and you make money while doing that, somehow that's considered disingenuous or wrong.
Not at
you're
all.
a bad person for making money while being nice to people or helping them out. But if you like build a business that's actually really bad for humanity, I won't name what those businesses are, and become a billionaire doing it, it's okay.
That's okay, exactly.
And somehow we've arrived in society in this flip-flop configuration where it should be the reverse, where if you're doing good for humanity, you should not only be okay to do well, but actually be applauded for doing well. And we have to change our mindset and thinking that way a little bit, I think, on our journey there. You know, I just want to take what you said about how Singapore Inc. is given the size of the country and it's interconnected, and look at all of us here in this room, has a chance to showcase this. But then in the context of the larger world, for example, with China, how does that interplay in some of the thinking that you have from Ping An's point of view?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, it's always nice to see Singapore playing an outsized role. And having lived here myself for 14 years, earlier in my life and career, I have some insight into the role that Singapore plays and the influence that they have, including to countries like China. And I think China has always looked from the Deng Xiaoping era, including when he personally visited Lee Kuan Yew here in Singapore in the late 70s. They have always looked to Singapore as, in many ways, a model that can be helpful for China's development. I think that China is taking this very seriously. They have a goal, as I said earlier, of neutrality by 60, which is different from the global goal of 50. But you have to remember where China is starting from and simply the scale of what we're talking about. We're talking about the largest industrial economy on the planet, and of course, along with that, the largest emitter in absolute terms. Of course, a much smaller emitter on a per capita basis than some developed economies, but also an economy that's still very much in the middle of its development path. I think we see in China some very encouraging developments. Probably very few of you have managed to get to Shenzhen in recent years because of COVID and the curbs on travel. With a little bit of luck, that will change over the next, I hope, 6 to 9 months, but who can say? But if you go to Shenzhen, even 3 years ago, 50% of the cars on the road were already electric cars. And I don't think there's anywhere I know of in the world that has been able to make the shift as quickly as that particular urban center. Now, it's not uniform in China, and there are structural impediments within the car industry because of For example, if you go to Beijing or Shanghai, the local, partly state-owned joint venture companies are just not as far along as BYD is in Shenzhen. So there's a little bit of resistance, but that's changing. And I think what China is showing is the ability to make very large structural changes quite quickly. So I think there's a lot more to come in this story. I think a second example is China's focused on renewables for electricity generation. And we see that with the continuing development of water power. So just recently, Ping An has been involved through our bank in financing a major Yangtze River power dam development. But there are many, many initiatives ranging from water power to wind to nuclear. Nuclear is making a very important renaissance in China, and whether you like it or not, nuclear has to be a very important ingredient in migrating away from fossil fuel, in particular coal. And then lastly, gas has become a very important phenomenon in China electricity generation. So I think we're beginning to see the shift. It's being led at, of course, the highest level in the country. China has many, many challenges, but they recognize this is one of them. Yeah. And I think the role that someone like Ping An plays as a sort of early adopter of the mantra of ESG responsibility, and within that, the focus on our climate footprint and that of our clients and partners. And I think other efforts by other companies and the government, I think these things are taking on their own momentum. I think what you see in China is the ability to actually drive change, once the consensus is achieved and once the urgency is recognized.
They're excellent at
probably
that,
faster than anywhere on
once
earth.
they've decided to go somewhere. I would like to just ask Helge quickly. You had mentioned that there's a hackathon that we'll not talk too much about coming up at COP, but that opens door to like the global aspect. You're going over to another country and you're going to ask for, I guess, ideas or problem statements. How does that filter into DBS, right? When you have this reach outside of just the core countries that you're operating in.
Well, I've established the purpose, why we do this, and DBS is very amazing because whenever we see that we're not as good at something than somebody else, then we reach out to that person and ask for help, right? So what we're going to do at this hackathon, or during the hackathon, and we did one last year as well, is really explaining to people what our problem statements are, and then let other people create ideas and we see whether they're better than our own. DBS is a special place because 28% of our workforce are either data scientists or software engineers. So many people want to be a tech company. I actually think we are one. We just so happen to also offer financial services. But it's really this ecosystem built that we are talking about. And I talked a little bit about the problem statements that we have, inward-looking, outward-looking. I don't want to go into the details, but the nuts and bolts of it is we need to work together.
Yes.
The challenge is way too big.
Yep.
And quite frankly, I don't really care which bank is number 1 or number 2. What we care about is addressing the 17 UN SDGs,
yes,
creating a healthy planet. That's the goal, and we can't do it alone.
That's really refreshing to hear. I mean, I think we've come to the tipping point where we realize that the collaboration it can't be eschewed or pushed off anymore. It has superseded other incentives that might be going inside within each companies. I do want to get to a few questions that have been posed, so I just want to give Maya a chance to speak about how, from your perspective, where you're providing this capability to see, to measure, and to implement, how do you envision that coming from here in Singapore and then expanding through which channels to make impact?
Yeah, I think the first piece, I have to absolutely resonate with what Helge said and Manjula said. Even in the world that we're in at Terrascope, we don't necessarily think we will do everything on our own. No. We think that there is a role to be played for several of us in this ecosystem. So this week we're excited to have the opportunity to work with a DBS bank and be able to say, how do we use the momentum that a bank can actually create in driving change in society, and how do we empower that decarbonization journey for their clients. We're very excited to sort of partner with deep people with deep consulting experience. ERM is a company that we're partnering with to be able to bring them in the loop and say, how do you provide pinpoint consulting solutions? But essentially, in thinking about the journey that we see for someone going down this path, there's a need for a consistent digital and technology layer to last well beyond the CEO lasts in the role. We're talking about a multi-decade journey. There'll be multiple CEOs in this journey. There'll be multiple sustainability officers in this journey. But how do you preserve the memory of what you started now and what needs to complete on that journey over X number of years? And we think that doing this is building a digital layer that brings experts and ecosystem to the table, right? And that has to be everything from assurance providers being able to use this platform and ensure that the journey is right, or bringing in people who are in the consulting world. And we call this whole model an expert in the loop model, right? And this is not just us, this is what we believe the solution will be for the world in being able to drive enough impact. The decarbonization journey, in my view, requires enough innovation, not just in the digital technology side, but also in the hard technologies. Whether that's sustainable fuel that you talked about, or it's renewable energy, or it's battery technology, or packaging technology. So we're going to need two elements of technology, both the digital layer and the hard tech and the deep tech, to actually move along the same lines. And that's what the world entails in the next few decades for all of us, to try and preserve the way of life that we have today.
Yeah, I think I honestly believe the next 5 years are going to be so critical for us to see where we're going to be going. And these things don't just, you can shift like left and right like a speedboat. Like this is like an aircraft carrier, pointing in this direction. And all of the work that you're doing together here on the stage is super important in guiding us, because again, we can't just make like left and right shifts. I do want to get to some questions that have been posed here, and one of them is about B Corps, which I found interesting. So the question is, do you think B Corps have a role to play in this transition, and what needs to be done to accelerate the movement in the fintech industry? Anyone want to comment about the role B Corps might play?
I can kick off and then hand off to one of you. I think if I step back, one of the things that's really exciting about the world we are playing in is increasingly we're saying profit and purpose have to align for a company. And I think whether you are a B Corp or not, there is acceptability that is starting to come. And there's still room to go and ways to go in sort of saying, how do you feel like there is not a trade-off between financial returns and purpose? What I love about B Corps and their role is there's permission to operate with the entire stakeholder set out there. I look at the B Corp model as a shining example of how we should all be behaving, whether we're B Corps or not. The proof in the pudding will be, does the capital market accept that model? Do shareholders and activist investors accept that model? And do boards move in that direction too? But to me, that's how I look at it. I look at B Corp as that end state of how I would love to see the world be inclusive in their decision-making of beyond financial returns.
Yeah, if I can sort of add to that, my prediction is that ESG is it was the first piece it served us to this point. The continuum is really a theory of change, which is social, economic, and environmental integrated reporting. To see your business with a C lens. We can't separate the financial and the non-financial anymore. We have to bring it integrated into the DNA of the business, into the operations, into the finance, into the HR, into all the management decisions. And my prediction is that we are going to use the SDGs to measure our outcomes and impact to global targets, and we're going to actually integrate this reporting. We have financial accounting at hundreds of years to standardize. We don't have hundreds of years to standardize sustainability reporting. And when I say sustainability reporting, I'm not meaning environment alone. I'm not meaning this other thing that you do on the side. I'm talking about integrating this reporting. The role of fintech now is to fast track that integrated P&L and balance sheet. If we do not do that we will end up further backwards than we are today. We have to do this as fintech providers, as consultants, as governments, as policymakers. We have to get to that common taxonomy. We have to measure and account in exactly the same way. And if it's not appearing on your P&L and balance sheet, no one's going to take any notice. And that's, in a way, the role of where B Corp, it's actually that purpose-driven organization that says, actually, profitability comes from being sustainable. So my prediction for the next year.
We'll hold you to that.
You're right, absolutely. Multi-capital reporting integrated into one.
I agree. I mean, I think in the future, the world won't be looked upon as for-profit or non-profit.
No.
I think that's an old world way of looking at companies.
Exactly.
I think there is a super view above that that's not necessarily defined the way we've looked at things. Do either one of you have anything to add?
No, I think that was very well summarized.
All right. Well, we've got a couple of minutes, and I do want to have each one of our guests here to be able to share their final parting thought, given the stage and all the people watching here. So please, would you just go down the line, and what would be the one message you want to share with everybody on our path?
The one thing I'd say is that the marriage between technology and financing has never been more important and more codependent than ever before. And the amount of acceleration of change that financing can provide to the ESG world, I never underestimate that. And so I think that there is a moment of opportunity for us to really shift the pace of change that is needed for us, so that every scenario of prediction of this world doesn't end in a doomsday scenario. And so I think this marriage is really useful, and I can't wait to see how we can accelerate this further.
Please, 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 please. We haven't got long. We've got to execute, execute, execute. We've got to work together, and we've got to solve the cause, not the symptoms. We've really got to do that. And if anyone's producing any solutions towards this agenda, don't create a solution looking for a problem. Go to the cause, fix that root cause, because if we do that together, we will have a planet for the next generation. And so my aim here is to unite everybody. We're going to be working with Maya, working with all this ecosystem, saying, come on, there's a continuum, there's data collection, there's processing, there's aggregation, there's dissemination, creating that value chain between all of us and having that one trusted golden source of data. And it can't be input-output data anymore. It has to be outcomes and impact data. Otherwise, we don't know where to invest, where to divest, where to manage risk, and what is actually working to scale. So I'm actually doing a demonstration of the G17 Eco platform in Hall 5, I believe. So please come and see me straight after this, and if you want to see it in action with SGX and what SGX is doing.
I just have a couple of points. I think, first of all, I completely agree with the need for standards, and I think the analogy that Manjula sort of posed that sort of to the evolution of accounting standards is quite apposite. I would say, however, that the financial system itself is actually, if we want to just focus on climate change and carbon emission, is actually a relatively small emitter directly. And to solve this problem, you have to be dealing with power generation, you have to be dealing with transport, you have to be dealing with agriculture and the industrial economy. And if we don't fundamentally change these things, we're not really going to impact that much. The financial system, of course, has enormous leverage and enormous influence, but this problem has to be solved in a much broader, coordinated way at the government, the supranational,
That's right.
Across industries, etc. I think one other caution I would make is, with these 17 development goals from the United Nations, I question whether the world will be fast enough to solve one of those goals, which is carbon emission. And I'm concerned, as an individual at least, that focusing on 17 things at once, all of which may be desirable, may be a recipe for lack of focus and just insufficient impact. So I think if we focused on 1, 2, and 3 rather than 17 and really put the vast bulk of our effort in those, we're probably likely to get to a better outcome.
Thanks. And Helge, you can lead us out with your
Now
final say.
now I have 3 messages. Previously it was 2. My first message would be I will challenge that later in the room because I don't
I'm
think we
gonna
can only
challenge
do
you
one.
as well.
Come join us
3.
later on if you
And I
want to
will
hear this
explain
debate.
why. The other 2 messages, picking up from Manjula, action matters, not words, guys.
Yes.
We need to move.
No blah blah.
And the second one is be part of the ecosystem change.
Yep.
As one potential step, check out our hackathon, but there are many, many other ways of doing it. But be part of the ecosystem change.
Thank you so much,
Amen.
everybody on the panel, and thank you all for joining us on this chat we had. If you want to see what happens in the back room, you can find us in the back. As
There's
we
going to
continue
be a
this discussion.
hackathon back there.
Good. Thank you.